Good morning. I love that. It's my favorite part of worship associating. I am delighted that I have the chance to tell you a little bit about the pagan community this morning. I'm sure there are many questions, but we exist everywhere, though often in secret for fear of persecution. It's only until relatively recently that a significant number of pagans have felt secure enough to come out of the broom closet, as we would say, and identify ourselves as pagan. In order to fully explain this to you, I need to tell you a bit of history and give you some modern context. The word pagan originally had very specific usage. It was a slur that is now reclaimed. When Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire, there was a period of transition and later Inquisition. This cultural exchange began in the cities and gradually moved outward. Therefore, the rural folks were typically the last to convert to Christianity. The term pagan was then used to apply to all other faiths and was used to speak condescendingly of those simple country folk that practiced the old religion. This is why people who refer to themselves as pagans are usually people who practice Reconstructionist religions reclaimed after a cultural genocide, whose traditions are based on older, earth-centered practices, often, but not always, from Europe. Indigenous spirituality could also be considered pagan due to the similarities in practice and belief, but many indigenous peoples do not refer to themselves as pagan. Colonization and the transatlantic slave trade also led to an assortment of other religions and practices to be included under the umbrella of paganism, including voodoo, hoodoo, and Santeria. Those who acknowledge a universal spirituality or who simply practice different forms of ceremonial magic can also be considered pagans, along with every type of eclectic that you can imagine and many others that I have not listed. In short, pagans are a very diverse group. Commonalities in belief include a practice of magic in one form or another, a belief that natural things have a spirit of some kind, and a sense of connection to the earth and to its patterns, whether that be in the form of gods and goddesses, fairies, and other spiritual beings, or simply the sun, the moon, and the stars. There's often a strong association and connection to our ancestors and to their traditions, as many pagan religions began with ancestor worship. It's also our common persecution that has led many different groups to accept the collective label of paganism and be in community with one another. Many of us reject patriarchal and institutional hierarchy in our circles, and we have often no leaders or leaders with term limits. This is also why we gather in a circle and on the same level as one another. You'll notice we're not utilizing the chancel this morning. That is why. We are equals under paganism. In the English-speaking world, paganism and magical practice was somewhat standardized in the 20th century, in the decades that followed the legalization of witchcraft in the United Kingdom and in the United States. Modern paganism, broadly, is informed by and practiced as feminist and queer liberation religion, with a focus on democracy and bodily autonomy. The persecution of witches was largely just the persecution of women, and it was under a guise. So that, of course, these principles are widely understood by the community because of that. This has also led to many queer and non-monogamous people to be pagan identified. It is these influences, particularly the influence of first and second wave feminism on paganism, that led to an evolution in UUism as well. The seventh principle was adopted by the UUA in 1985, and a sixth source acknowledging earth-centered religion was added in 1995, both at the behest of notable UU women like Starhawk, who were looking for acknowledgement of goddess-based spirituality, changing the focus from solely masculine deities. This change also led to the UUA chartering the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans in 1985, which has since grown to have over 110 chapters, hopefully 111 very soon, across the country. It is this level of institutional acceptance of pagan belief and practice that has led to close ties between American pagans and the Unitarian Universalist Church. This is one of the very few organizations in the country and in the world, really, that provides a place for us to practice and learn our faith and defends our very right to exist. It is for that reason that so many of us are proud to say, I am a pagan and I am a Unitarian Universalist. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. There we go. Hey. All right. My name is Kate Earle. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I've been a member of UUCR since 2015 and a pagan since at least 1996. Expect you're going to hear some different paths today, and I think that that is one of the ways that in the same way, like there's as many ways to be a pagan as there are ways to be a UU. Back in the day, I really started focusing on paganism because of my Irish ancestry, but I had to be adaptable in my practices as I moved around a lot during 20 years in the Air Force. So, for example, in 2002, I worshiped with some Druids up north of Baltimore, yes, and we already said that no one's a Druid like Gordon's a Druid. But so their practices were a little different, felt a little strange to me just because they didn't cast a circle like we did here earlier. They just kind of left an offering and asked the spirits that were there to kind of leave us alone. We're going to do our thing, you do your thing, and we'll all just get along. Then after that, I moved to California, and I found a very organized Wiccan group in Santa Cruz, California. They had very organized rituals. They definitely cast a circle. And I am still friends with some of them on Facebook, and I love seeing their pictures of beautiful rituals and altars in the redwood trees. And, you know, it's just one of those things where, you know, Semper Gumby, as we said, you know, always flexible. So when I went to visit a friend in Washington State, she took me to a group of pagans that followed the teachings of Gerald Gardner, who is like kind of the original neo-pagan, and so sometimes that's called high episcopagan because they are very hierarchical and they have very strict ways of doing things, and so I was glad I got to experience it, but it wasn't really my path. So yeah, and I will say in 2014, when I was retiring from the military, I was happy I finally got to pick the prayer, because it was my retirement. And so I actually asked, yeah, exactly, it was my retirement, I get to pick the prayer for the first time in 20 years. So I talked to the interim caretaker minister at Paint Branch UU, and you know, he asked me, okay, well, what flavor of UU are you? And I told him I was a pagan, and he was like, oh, okay, do you want me to call the directions? And I said, yes. And so he did, and then everyone there got really quiet, and they didn't know what to do. And so he said, amen. And they all said, oh, okay, whew, we're back on solid ground now. He said amen, and I know what to do now, okay. But yeah, so in 2015, when I was looking for a new UU congregation, an active pagan group was one of the important things, and that's why I found and stayed with UU Rockville.
I'm Lisa Reed. My pronouns are she and her. My path toward pagan practices started in my youth, even though I didn't know it. I spent much of my day in the small patches of woodland near my home. I'm a self-taught pagan, and I don't really identify with any school. My early spirituality was the patriarchy of Southern conservative Christians. I jettisoned that in my late teens and wandered a while through various groups until one day I wandered into a UU congregation. They were forming a choir. I was home, but I still hadn't found the paganism. My friend, Sarah Prince, brought me to my early circles. I was very skeptical. I am a doubting Thomas. But something happened to me in one of my very first circles. You see, I was pregnant. It was my third pregnancy, and it didn't make sense for me to be uneasy about it. But as we moved in the circle and sang and chanted and did gestures of gratitude and acceptance, my mind quieted, and I could hear the small voice that speaks inside me. During the ceremony, I received two messages. My first was that the pregnancy uneasiness was real. And the second message was that I would be okay, and I would not be at fault, and so I shouldn't be afraid. It was all really weird. A month later, I miscarried. I nearly died. I remembered the ceremony from a month earlier. It was comforting to understand that this was just life. It was not some divine lesson. It was not punishment. It was very helpful to just focus on grief and healing. And I started going to as many pagan circles as I could find. I have had many experiences through my life of knowing what was coming or knowing what someone was thinking. Science calls it ESP. But my early spirituality taught me that I was crazy to believe any of it. Paganism has affirmed my other senses and knowledge. I have found like-minded people and formed deeper connections with them. I built a new, affirming spirituality that accepts me as I am, honors my insights, and helps me keep my connections with nature. Paganism powerfully affirms the feminine and the sacredness of the earth. I love casting circles. It allows me to claim sacred ground wherever I need it and whenever I need it. Casting a circle can create community. Circles draw people in and offer safe space and acceptance. Casting a circle knits a stronger community among the participants. My spirituality is bound to this blue-green sphere spinning through space that nurtures and sustains me. It is the source of my sense of the divine. Quoting Starhawk, Earth Mother, Star Mother, you who are called by 1,000 names, may all remember we are cells in your body and dance together. You are the grain and the loaf that sustains us each day. And as you are patient with our struggles to learn, so shall we be patient with ourselves and with each other. We are radiant light and sacred darkness. The balance. Within you, we are born, we grow, live, and die. You bring us around the circle to rebirth. So here I stand with you, bound to the web of creation in this circle made sacred by our intention as the great wheel turns toward the coming fall. Air, fire, water, earth, and a fifth element, love, pulse through my body as breath, warmth, blood, bone, and spirit. I am present in this moment, alive, aware of the earth around me, connected to this circle of friends and soul companions on our blue boat home.
I was lucky enough to grow, I'm Jenny Yates. I was lucky enough to grow up outside any mainstream religion. When I was a child, my family and I lived in several Buddhist countries. I picked up plenty about the traditional Christian hierarchy from the British school I attended, but I never had to attend any sort of church. My dad was a devout atheist, and my mom wanted to play golf on Sundays. When we moved back to the States in the 60s, my dad was 45, and this is when he discovered and embraced the Unitarian Church. My dad was a cerebral, intellectual, and principled person who identified as a secular humanist and tended to scoff at the idea of supernatural forces. At the same time, he wasn't just an intellectual. He was also kind, deeply sympathetic, and concerned about injustice, and he found a home for these feelings in the Unitarian Church as well. But my dad and I didn't agree on all things. We once had a long argument on whether a rock had consciousness. For him, this idea was absurd. But from an early age, I believed that everything has consciousness and that there are no bystanders in this world we live in. For me, the web of life is highly personal and includes rocks, trees, wind, rain, candle flames, moon glow, planetary cycles, and many unknown forces. I am a voice for the elements, and they are a voice for me. I'm a pagan because I believe in magic. Of course, like all of you, I spend my daily life in a skein of logic and consequence, but I'm also always aware of larger forces nudging me in one direction or another. Whenever I reach a crossroads of any kind, falling in love, coming out, dedicating myself to a craft, the universe as a whole seems to move the pieces around in unexpected ways. And I participate in this process. I'm not a bystander either. I connect to the elemental forces around me, not just for wisdom and understanding, but also for power and energy. Even though there are a lot of arcane systems out there, making magic is not difficult. It's all about focusing your attention somewhere, absorbing the feeling of that object, process, or act, and getting in touch with your own will and desire at the same time. You will always resonate more with certain objects, images, bits of music, periods of time. These are your building blocks for magic. Of course, what you are moving towards has to be aligned with your own good and the good of others. One magical principle is that whatever you put out returns to you threefold. So you never want to put out anything negative. And so for me, a rock isn't inert. It's a magical helper that can add its power to my quest if it chooses. I have been a practicing pagan for about 50 years, but in the last decade, I've also come back to the Unitarian Church. Why? The church has changed. It's become more open, more mystical. I still feel it's a good place for intellectual and moral growth, but it's no longer limited to intellectual constructions. More and more, there's room for magic.